completed in January of 2019. Is that right? January 2019 was when it was completed. And it was a great process, and it's really helped the city of Des Moines to look at how they move forward from here. So we have folks from Johnston, Urbandale, and I had some folks from Clive that were joining us as well, and I'm not sure if they have hopped on yet or not. But why don't we go around and do introductions? So say who you are and where you're from, and if you're with city council from one of the communities, let us know that. But Bill, why don't we start with Bill Cox? Let's start with you.
Okay, excuse me, Bill Cox. I live in Johnston. Am I coming through?
Yeah.
And recently moved here a year and a half ago. I reside at Vintage Co-op, which is by, on Windsor Parkway. And the group that I'm probably tightest with would be Interfaith Green Coalition. And then also worked with Carrie on the Mayor's Sustainability Committee for Des Moines.
All right, thanks, Bill. And Ginger, why don't we go to you next? I'm just going to go across my screen as people are there.
Well, it says Virginia Solberg. I also go by Ginger Solberg. I live in Johnston. I've been active in community activities, primarily environmental interests, and glad we're doing this.
Yeah. And Linda, you would be next.
I'm Linda Lemons. I'm a member of the Climate Sustainability Group in Urbandale, and I'm interested in climate justice. Thank you for doing this, Carrie.
Yeah. And Rhonda, how about we go to you?
Hi there, Rhonda Martin. I am a city council member in Johnston, Iowa. My background is I'm a landscape architect. I work up at Iowa State University. I work for the university. I have a strong interest in protecting our environment, being a good steward of our lands and our waters. And I think this is a very important subject. Trying to do what we can to protect our environment and make sure that our children have the great future that, you know, they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Julia?
Hi there, my name is Julia McGuire, and I work with 1,000 Friends of Iowa, and I'm happy to see everybody participating.
Thank you for joining us. We'll go over to you, Rod.
Rod Stevens. I was a Urbandale resident for 32 years and moved to Johnston 5 years ago. My background is I'm an architect and a facility manager, and I am a founding member of the Green Team in our church. Also, like Bill, involved with the Interfaith Green Coalition, and I'm also a member of the board of directors of Iowa Interfaith Power and Light.
Thanks for being with us. And then Julie?
Yes, hi, I'm Julie Hill. So my daughter Lillian Hill is not able to join us this evening, but I wanted to hop on and listen. So my daughter has a strong passion for climate change, and as well as I do too, but she's been trying to organize different events and trying to make an impact within the city of Johnston, and has reached out to a couple council members that are on the call right now, and to her principals and teachers to try and make an impact. So I'm going to share what I learned with Lillian this evening.
Great, thank you. And Marianne?
Okay, Marianne Koch, and I'd heard a lot about the sustainability push effort in Des Moines, and I got to thinking, why shouldn't Urbandale be working on that also? So that's, I kind of jumped into this group. So thank you.
And Morgan?
Hi, I'm Morgan Molden. I am a current Johnston resident, and I lived in for that. I was on the Parks and Rec board there with a special interest in trying to get them to adopt some more conservation and natural play areas. And then I grew up in Urbandale, so I've been around. I am involved at low levels of Rhonda's wonderful campaign and Karen Derry's campaign as well, and I hope to be involved in Scott's next time he runs. I didn't really get a chance to jump in as much as I could have last time. So, but yeah, I have 3 little girls and trying to raise them to love the earth and preserve what we have left of it.
Well, thanks for being on. And Scott, we'll go to you next.
Hey everyone, Scott Soroka. I'm a city council member in Johnston with Rhonda. Really excited to be here with all of you. I had some constituents reach out looking to see what the city of Johnston could be doing on climate change. And we kind of ended up here. So happy to support and kind of figure out what can be done.
Great, thanks for being with us. And Matt, we'll go to you next.
I'm assuming that's me. I put down Matt because I went to my husband's email and we knew one of us would be able to join. So I'm Sammy Jo Tappy. And we have just done some things personally to try and help reduce like emissions and that. And so we're interested in figuring out what we can do on a larger scale.
All right, and I apologize. I'm looking at the participant list, so I'm just looking at names and not.
Oh, you're fine. I didn't want to like not be allowed in if I put my name since it went to his, so.
And how about Betty?
I'm Betty Salmon, and my family has been long-term residents of Urbandale. I'm retired, but I taught biology for many, many years with a long time interest in climate and environmental things. And so I'm on the committee, the Urbandale Sustainability Committee.
Great. And Angie, we'll go to you next.
Hi, I'm Angie Silling. I live in Johnston, Iowa. I have my undergrad and graduate degrees in health science, community health, public health, so environmental health is very important to me, and I think there's some things that we could do in Johnston to improve our community. I'm also a mom of 2 young boys, so as Morgan said, very important to me to help teach them just some different things that they can do as well. I am involved in Rhonda's campaign and Karen's campaign and at the tail end of Scott's campaign, and Scott actually invited me tonight, so thank you.
Great. And then Eric Holt, we'll go to you next. And you will have to unmute if you are speaking.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, sorry about that. My name is Eric, and I live in Johnston. I met Scott while caucusing back in February. My wife and I have been trying to find ways to become more involved. So when Scott invited me to this meeting, it sounded like a good opportunity.
Great, glad to have you. And then Ron, we'll go to you next.
Yeah, I'm Ron Poogie. I serve on the Urbandale City Council.
Great to have you with us. Thank you. And then Pat, I'm assuming that's you, the phone number, the 669 number.
Yes, that is I. And my name is Pat Bodier. I'm part of that Urbandale Climate and Sustainability team. And Eric, very grateful that you're joining us. Thank you for this.
Yeah. So I know that there were a few other folks who were planning on joining us, Susan Judkins and Bridget and a couple other council folks who had said they were joining us. So hopefully they'll go ahead and hop on. But otherwise, why don't we go ahead and turn it over to you, Eric Giddens, and you can introduce yourself. If folks could mute themselves while Eric's talking, and then we can jump in with questions. I guess I'll let you kind of figure out when you want questions and so forth, Eric. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, thank you, Carrie, for organizing this, and to all of you for joining. This is a really great opportunity to have folks from several different communities together to talk about, what we've done at the CEEE at UNI with the program that I work with, and see if, if you guys have interest in trying to do some of this work in your communities. I'd love to set up partnerships and move forward that way. So, Carrie had a pretty basic agenda just for me to, excuse me, first to just describe the program that we do. And then, and more specifically in terms of greenhouse gas emissions inventories, like how that really works, the nuts and bolts of that. And then we can open it up to questions. So if you have anything else you'd like me to talk about, I'm happy to try to do that. So I'm a program manager at the Center for Energy and Environmental Education at UNI. Also happen to be a new state senator. I was elected to the Senate last March in a special election. So that's a new role for me, and obviously an interesting time to be a new legislator with all that we're going through right now. So I spend a lot of time these days responding to constituent concerns and that kind of thing. And now we look like we'll be headed back to the legislature June 3rd. I think that date will stick this time. So anyway, so I think I can just launch into the presentation. I'll try to share my screen. Hopefully that'll work. And we can go from there. Can you guys see that? Yep, okay, good. So I'll admit, this is a presentation I put together for a little bit more of a general audience than you guys. You all get this stuff pretty, pretty deeply, obviously, but I thought I'd use it and kind of fly through the first slides and then get to the later stuff. So I had titled this thing Global Climate Change and Local Climate Action because there's a little bit of background on, the issue. The science is clear. You all know that. This is something that's been urgent for a while. This graphic is one of the most striking things for me that shows, over hundreds of thousands of years, like where we are currently and how it's all happened in the last few decades, so we obviously need to do something about the carbon that we have been emitting into the atmosphere and that we are not sequestering at a commensurate rate, essentially. There were a series of reports that came out over the last couple of years that really talked, about this has been a problem obviously for a long time, but it's hitting a fever pitch. And the October 2018 IPCC report was essentially stated that, we're going to hit 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming sooner than we thought we would. So kind of accelerated our concern here. We need to do all we can to reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Right after that October 2018 IPCC report, the fourth National Climate Assessment report was released. The Black Friday of 2018, the Friday right after Thanksgiving, if you'll recall, seemingly in an effort to, keep it hidden from most of the public. But I found this statement that I've highlighted and underlined at the bottom to be, one of the most startling things, that hundreds of billions of dollars by the end of the century, is going to be the economic impact. So this is obviously not just an issue for the environment. And so when we're looking for ways to talk across the political spectrum, this is what resonates with folks on the what I'll call the other side of the aisle. So we got to do something. A couple more reports. Iowa Policy Project wrote a great paper called An Uncertain Future. Those two graphs, I love the graphic for one. I also love, that this is real data. This isn't projections or, modeling of any kind. This is actual data that shows that temperatures are rising in Iowa and that precipitation is on the increase too. We know that we've had flood event after flood event, and that's only going to continue to get worse. So you're probably all familiar with the annual Iowa climate statement that a group of university scientists and other faculty and staff at our universities our universities and colleges put out every year. This is the one that was done last year, 2019. The theme was dangerous heat. So basically, historically, we'd have about 23 days annually above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And the projections, between the years 2036 and 2065 are that we're going to be somewhere between 57 and 68 days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So extreme heat is an issue. Couple that with, all the precipitation that we're experiencing and land use changes that have been happening for a long time. The flooding that we experience is only going to get worse, and we gotta deal with it. So that's the background on the problem. I just wanted to fly through that. You guys are all familiar with that. So climate action planning, let me just put these up there. What is climate action planning? We know that climate change is caused by greenhouse gas emissions, and we need to reduce emissions. It's a pretty basic concept. A lot of people will say, "Oh, but the electricity grid's rapidly becoming less carbon intensive," and that is true. We drive across the countryside in Iowa, and we see all of our windmills. We're now over 40% of our electricity is generated from renewable sources, and that number is increasing, and carbon sources decreasing. But that's only one piece of the equation. There are other sources of greenhouse gas emissions, and we need to deal with those. So shifting to renewable energy is important, but it's only addressing the supply side. We need to think about the demand side as well, and we need to think about other activities that result in greenhouse gas emissions, like transportation, heating of buildings, solid waste generation and disposal, water use, and other things too. So the point of climate action planning is to develop a set of strategies that local governments have some degree of control over. So things that a local government can do, whether it's a policy change at the local level or a program that can be implemented locally that will result in the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions over time. In our goal with this planning process is to model, the impact that those changes, those strategies will have in reducing greenhouse gas emissions out into the future over time. So for our program at UNI, we started doing this in 2017. At that time, we had some changes in the center that I work at, staffing wise, and an opportunity to look at programs we were doing, and we thought this is something that we kind of have the capacity and the resources to do at a center like ours, and to try to bring those resources that we do have, the limited resources, to bear in attacking what we consider to be our largest environmental problem that we're experiencing right now, which is climate change. So we joined, well, first we tried to figure out how cities are doing this all and for themselves in cities that have the capacity internally to do this type of work. And one of the things is an external organization called ICLEI, the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, referred to by its acronym. ICLEI developed the protocol for doing greenhouse gas emissions accounting and for modeling the impact that reduction strategies can have over time. So they're a membership organization. We joined as a regional, what's called a regional affiliate membership, and that gives any local government in the state of Iowa that's interested in doing this work the ability to use ICLEI's resources through our membership at the CEEE. So that was a kind of a key thing there. They developed and manage an online software program called ClearPath, which is kind of how we do this planning. We gather data, and I'll talk about that data in a little bit, but we gather data related to activities that result in greenhouse gas emissions. We enter them into ClearPath to develop an emissions inventory for the community. And then also in ClearPath, we're able to model those reduction strategies that we talked about that a community can pursue to try to reduce greenhouse gas emissions out into the future at the local level with local actions. So ICLEI membership is the first key thing. The second thing is for us, kind of have two goals in this. One is helping communities do this type of work. The other thing is we're an education institution, and we want to give young folks really good experience in this type of work. So student engagement is kind of at the core of what we do. And so we hire student interns, really had great partnerships in the last couple of years in 3 programs in particular. We're also interested in any students that are interested in this type of work, but we have a planning program in our geography department at UNI. We have a public administration program in the political science department, and then our environmental science program too. We've gotten some really great student interns from all 3 of those programs, and that's worked really well. I've had a few faculty even that have integrated pieces of these projects that we're doing with cities into their curricula as a part of their classes, class projects essentially, but real world class projects that have worked out really well as well. And then we have, you may be familiar, may have heard of our AmeriCorps program at the CEEE called Green Iowa AmeriCorps. That's grown in the last couple of years to a really large program, well over 100 AmeriCorps members stationed in different communities around the state. We engage those AmeriCorps members in doing this work as well, and are continuing to kind of try to develop that work through the AmeriCorps members in the communities that they serve in. So just wanted to mention this. When the first step in the process, I probably should have put the next slide before this one. They're a little bit backwards, but the first step in the process, what Carrie talked about earlier, is doing a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So it's just a baseline inventory of what the community is doing, what activities in the community are resulting in greenhouse gas emissions, so that you can do some planning and modeling for how to reduce those emissions. You got to have a baseline in order to work forward and have something to measure against. So 2 different types. I just put this slide in here to show you the 2 different scales or types of inventories that can be done. one is a community-wide inventory, so that's all activities across the entire community that result in greenhouse gas emissions. And the basic activities that result in greenhouse gas emissions are residential, commercial, and industrial energy use, and that is electricity and natural gas. It's kind of in each of those three sectors. Then transportation, which the data point we use for that is vehicle miles traveled, total vehicle miles traveled within the jurisdiction that we're dealing with. In these cases, it would be your city jurisdictions. Water and wastewater, both, water used, and then like the volume of water used, the electricity and natural gas used in treating that water and distributing it. And then on the other end, same thing for wastewater. How much wastewater is expelled and what are the characteristics of the wastewater treatment that you have? Is there any anaerobic digestion? Is methane being captured and reused in the wastewater treatment process? Those things have an impact on emissions. And then, kind of generally how much energy is used in that treatment process. Kind of the same sort of things for solid waste as wastewater. How much, solid waste is being generated? What are the, how far is it being transported? What are the characteristics of the landfill, where it winds up? Does it have a methane capture system? What happens with that gas if it does? Is that gas being treated and used as an energy source for some nearby energy need? Or is it being flared into the atmosphere, which is still a whole lot better than just direct emissions of methane into the atmosphere? So, we gather data related to all of those things, put them into ClearPath, and that develops the inventory for the community. So that community-wide inventory is the first one, first type of inventory. The other type of analysis we can do is for the government operations itself. So if your city government is interested in just looking at its own operational footprint, its buildings and facilities, its street lights, I've listed those things there, street lights, traffic signals, the vehicle fleet that the city owns, if you have public transit, those things. Employee commute can be included. Sometimes that data might be difficult to acquire, but it can be used in this inventory, and so forth. So just the operational footprint of the city government itself is another scale of analysis that we can do. I should have said, if you guys want to ask questions, just shout out. We don't have to wait till the end, but I'll just keep going if I don't hear anything. So yeah, this is what I said. Maybe I should have put before that last slide, but we start the process with greenhouse gas emissions inventory. That's your baseline. It could be the government operations, the operational footprint of the local government itself, or it could be community-wide, or you could do both. And that's just collecting data related to those activities that we talked about. So we've got a set of data, a list of data that we need to collect, electricity bills, natural gas bills, water bills, vehicle miles traveled. We typically get from the Department of Transportation. They have that broken down into city, city jurisdictions. And then solid waste would come from can come from a variety of sources depending on who handles solid waste in the community. But we gather all that data and organize it, and then get it into ClearPath to develop some cool charts to look at as our baseline. Then after the emissions inventory, which Carrie kind of said, we're mostly focused on the inventory right now because that has to happen first before we can move forward. But just so you get a clear picture of where all this goes, after the inventory, we do what's called a business as usual forecast. So looking out into the future, we can put in some growth factors. The most basic one really is population growth. So what's the trend in your community? Is your community growing or shrinking? And at what rate? So we can put that factor in there. And then the other most common growth factor we use is carbon intensity in the electricity grid. So as we mentioned earlier, the electricity grid in Iowa is greening. It has been for quite a while. And you know, if we're looking out into the future for what greenhouse gas emissions are going to look like in a community if we don't take any action, which is what business as usual means, we do have to, you know, give ourselves credit for the greening of the electricity grid that's already occurring and will continue to occur into the future. So we put in, you know, those two factors, population growth, the change in carbon intensity in the electricity grid, the rate of change of carbon intensity in the electricity grid. And then we could use other factors like the general trend in use of energy can be put in. If we have already see a trend that electricity use has been declining or natural gas use has been declining or increasing, we could put in factors like that. But anyway, we build you know, a forecast of what emissions will look like out into the future if the city just continues on its current course and doesn't take any action. Then we can begin really planning. And the planning process is looking at strategies, as I mentioned earlier, policy changes or programs typically that can be implemented that we can model for their, you know, reduction potential in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions out into the future. And that, you know, needs to actually start before you choose those strategies. You need to try to figure out what your goal is, what you're trying to get to out in the future. One recommendation is to follow the IPCC guidelines. Their recommendations of 45% below the 2010 baseline level by the year 2030, and then we need to get to net zero by 2050. You could choose a more customized goal for yourself, but choose a goal out into the future that you're trying to get to, then model those strategies for their reduction potentials. You know, put that on the chart, put each of those strategies on the chart with the business as usual forecast and see how far we can pull that curve down out into the future. It's the charts that this program develops for us are really great visual tools for looking out into the future, you know, and contemplating the types of things that you might like to consider doing as a city. And then that gets, you know, those strategies, once they've been chosen, if all the stakeholders agree on them, then they can be put together into a document called a climate action plan, can be adopted by your city, and, you know, can begin to work on those things. I like to think of it kind of as a good addendum to a comprehensive plan. You know, all of our local governments have to develop comprehensive plans. Many of them have a sustainability section in them or some sort of environmental section. This is a tool that can be added, you know, to that as an appendix that supports your sustainability goals that might already be a part of your comprehensive plan, and it really can support decisions that you have to make as a city government on an annual basis in terms of what programs you'd like to implement, you know, and for your budgeting process too, that you have to do towards the end of the year every year. So that's the bigger picture here. And then of course, a plan needs to be, the progress towards the goals in a plan needs to be measured. So the longer term thing would be after you begin implementing a plan to go back and do additional inventories using the same process that we did for that baseline inventory, do additional inventories in years, to come, where we can see whether we're making progress or not. And if we're not, then maybe adjustments need to be made to the plan. But that's the, the goal overall. So again, this is kind of for a general audience. I threw in some photos just to give folks things to think about, like, because the next question I often get is, what sort of strategies are you talking about? What kinds of things could go into a plan? And so top right, I pick on our own local community here whenever I do this, so that I'm not picking on anybody else. But top right is our landfill in Blackhawk County, and it currently does not have a methane capture system. One of the really low-hanging fruit things we could do in Blackhawk County would be to add a methane capture system to our landfill. And even if we just flared that gas, I mean, we know that methane is 25 to 28 times as potent as carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. Flaring it converts it to carbon dioxide, so you're reducing its global warming potential by 25 to 28 times less. So so that'd be a low-hanging fruit kind of thing we could do here in Blackhawk County. The bottom right, I'll go clockwise from top right around. The bottom right is the University Avenue corridor in Cedar Falls. And this was a picture of when it was still kind of under construction. It's a new project, but we replaced a whole string of signalized intersections with roundabouts, added better infrastructure for public transit, more bike paths along the sides. We already have a great bike trail network in our community here. This made this corridor more bikeable and more safe, really. So, long term, this is like a long-term strategy that has an impact in lots of little ways on greenhouse gas emissions. And so I mentioned the public transit infrastructure. Now we got to develop our public transit a little bit better to be used, but you can't do that without the infrastructure. So we help to put that in place. Getting rid of signalized intersections keeps us from using electricity, and it keeps vehicles from idling and all of that. And then of course biking is good, and the more we can encourage that, the better. And then the top or the left two images are two areas of Cedar Falls that are exactly the same scale. And this is what I like to talk about the most, really. I'm most interested in, and this is one of the reasons I appreciate the work that Thousand Friends of Iowa and Carrie, that you guys have done, is talk about land use. And so the bottom image on the bottom left is the downtown area in Cedar Falls. It's a traditional development pattern, higher density, mixed use. It checks all the boxes of what we know smart growth principles are now and what we need to be doing with development. The top left is a newer neighborhood, obviously completely residential, same scale as the bottom, and bad development, in my opinion. Essentially urban sprawl. So I'll just move on from that. Don't want to take too much time. So I would say, this is my contact information. I'd encourage you to write it down if you'd like. And the next step, I mean, the way I see it, the next step, if your community is interested in doing a greenhouse gas emissions inventory with us, what we ask is we need a person. It usually works best if it's a city staff person, but it could be a city council person as well. But we need somebody to be our point of contact in the community that can help us gather all this data, and that will respond to communication and all of that. So one person that's a point of contact, and then what I will do is pair that person with a UNI student, in this case, maybe a Green Iowa AmeriCorps member, but probably a student. And then I supervise that student, and we work on organizing the data that you give us. We'll give you the list of data. You start collecting it and sending it to us. We'll organize it into a spreadsheet, and then enter it into ClearPath and develop the inventory from there. And once we're satisfied with that, we have all the data collected sufficiently, and we can draft a report. And even, maybe do a presentation. We did that for the city of Des Moines. We did a city council presentation in a work session. That's the, it's pretty basic, is just gathering data. It's kind of boring too, collecting a lot of data, putting it in a spreadsheet, enter it into this software ClearPath, and then writing a report. That's that first step of developing an emissions inventory. But the key thing is having a dedicated contact person in the city government to work with on that. So can I go back, like take the screen share away now? Is that okay? So
Eric,
yep.
Eric, before you do that, can you go back one slide and tell me more about your thoughts about the two different developments and how the upper left-handed picture, did you say that was the bad one, the sprawl one?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, I mean, as a landscape architect, I know a lot of landscape architects out there would say, oh my goodness, look at how well we're doing with that building, with that community. It's got connected greenways. You can see that the water systems are probably connected. So talk to me about why that is worse than the left lower.
Okay, so one of the big problems is that there's nowhere for these folks to go that doesn't require vehicle travel. What we need to be, there's a well-developed set of principles called smart growth that we know we need to be following in order to build more mixed use development, higher density development, with more well integrated opportunities for biking and walking, and commercial opportunities, commercial and entertainment opportunities nearby, those kinds of things. That's the biggest problem with this picture is you can't get anywhere without getting in a car and going somewhere, and it's a couple miles away to the nearest, business development area that is, also a part of our exclusionary zoning system that only has commercial development in it. So we've got to integrate these things a little bit better and give people opportunities to walk places. At the end of the day, it's a long-term planning, tool that will reduce energy use. The end of the day, this development pattern requires a lot of energy use. It's energy intensive just inherently. Another thing you don't see, you might not ever think of, is the wastewater. Okay, we have to pump water out to this part of town, And then every toilet that's flushed and every drop of water that goes down the drain has to get back to our wastewater treatment plant. And the wastewater treatment plant is the one that you see in the bottom image right by the river, a couple of miles away from this development in the top left. It has to go, all that wastewater has to go through two very high energy pumping stations just to get rid of our wastewater out of that development. So, you know, there's just, we could go on and on about why exclusively residential development that is not high density at all is very energy intensive and not sustainable. And those are just a few of them.
I get what you're saying, but you know, now that we're all, a lot of us are at home with our businesses. I keep thinking about how COVID-19 is going to transform our communities. I know a lot of businesses, Scott, Councilman Soroka and I were talking about, there are several large businesses out there that are telling their people they're not going to go back to work this year, or they're going to give them choices to stay home. So, so there is that. And if people stay home, that means they maybe don't have to have a car for everybody. And then we don't have to build great big parking lots at work because there's fewer people showing up there. So I think that there is some give and take, but I do understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to sprawl. You can just, you know, that's what this development pattern is urban sprawl. And, you know, there's plenty to read about the, you know, the problems associated with urban sprawl. And
yeah,
so,
Rhonda, I'd be happy to send you more information if you wanted. I think one of the other things we're concerned with is that, you know, communities need to do everything they can to reduce their emissions, but we also have to look at ways that we can draw down the emissions that are already in the atmosphere. And every time we dig up ground to build a new development, we're actually releasing more greenhouse gas emissions into the air and taking up ground that otherwise would be storing that carbon. So we can talk about that further, but that is also another thing to think about.
Okay.
were there any other questions on the slides, or can I stop the screen share so I can see more folks?
I have a question.
Okay.
So building on what Rhonda said, as far as the urban sprawl, one of the biggest ways then to prevent that is to, wouldn't it, I mean, because a lot of people want new homes. So would it have to be to have some kind of a quota or a code or something on how many new homes a community would have each year?
Most of that, you know, the improvements or the strategies that can be employed to combat urban sprawl are associated with your zoning ordinance. That's what sets all of the rules, you know, for the development pattern in your community. So there's a lot of different pieces to that can be changed to promote a better pattern of development, and most of it is in the zoning ordinance. So I mean, that's not a detailed answer to your question, but that's the place we need to focus if we're going to combat climate change or urban sprawl, is developing a better planning and zoning system. And usually that means some modification to a zoning ordinance.
One of the things the city of Des Moines just did is move to a form-based code. And with the form-based code, one piece of that is really to look at how to create neighborhoods into more neighborhoods into being walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods. So there are some really great examples of how to do zoning codes and comprehensive planning that better addresses how we develop our communities, that can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So it seems like in terms of next steps, you know, there's clearly a lot of citizens that are interested in moving their cities forward on this type of thing. And it seems like the next steps are, you know, a greenhouse gas emissions inventory to kind of have a benchmark baseline to work with before moving forward on a climate action plan. So I was just curious, Eric, to hear from you, or Carrie too, feel free to add. What would you recommend to the people on the call today? You know, what should they take away? What should they go do after this? Kind of like if you can connect the dots or build the bridge from here at this meeting to actually getting, you know, a Johnston or an Urbandale to work with you and partner with you and your students on taking this next step of an inventory, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I really, it's having, like I said earlier, having a dedicated contact person who city staff, it works really well. Sometimes a concern that or an issue we run into there though is that if this isn't a priority in their, you know, workflow, then it can often be pushed to the back burner, and it's difficult to, you know, to make any progress, to move forward with it. So the more support we can get from mayors and city councils and to prioritize this work, the better. And to have a person who is our point person that we can call and we know that they'll respond, pick up the phone, answer questions and all of that. Like that's pretty basic, but I mean, that prioritization for this project is pretty important.
And we had in the city of Des Moines, Eric had drafted up a memo of understanding that the city council voted on and approved, which then directed city staff to work with Eric when they did theirs.
Yeah, and if we can certainly do that. I actually, Carrie, I think the MOU that we were working on was to do the next steps with the climate action planning, you know, after the inventory, and we wound up putting together a different program with ICLEI to do a cohort of cities of various sizes that we're working through right now. And you got in Des Moines, you got a new staff person. So those pieces came together pretty nicely. Jeremy Caron is now the sustainability program manager for the city of Des Moines just as of this past week. And that, you know, I tell you that having a sustainability staff person, a fully dedicated sustainability staff person in city government is one of the best things that can push this type of work forward. You know, is very few cities have that, but the ones that do, they're the ones that are really advancing this work. But I understand that's tough adding a new staff person. So especially right now with all the budget uncertainty that all of us are going through. So absent that, I would just say back to, you know, if you have support, if your council isn't, you know, at odds with each other about the importance of this thing, sometimes that can be a problem. But if you have the support in the city generally, and you can find a person in the city staff who will prioritize this project and work with us on helping us get that data and, you know, responding to questions and things like that, then we can move ahead with it.
What other investments would the city need to put aside to get the inventory? I mean, are you saying that the students will use it as part of their experiential learning, or do we need to get professionals involved to provide some of the information needed to make the inventory work?
No, I think just for the inventory, we will do that. We have some funds that we can support paying the student interns to do that work, and my salary right now anyway is is funded. So we're good. We're happy to work with cities to do the inventory piece. Then if a city wants to move forward and really look at those strategies, currently we don't have the capacity to do that without getting some sort of payment if we move forward with developing those reduction strategies and really doing the planning process. But another thing that can be done at that point is to hire a consultant. There are consultant companies that do that work, and one thing that they would add to the process, we're actually going through this right now in Cedar Falls. One thing that, big thing actually that the consultants can add that we don't have the capacity to do at all is the public engagement piece. It's really important when you get to that point of talking about what strategies you'd like to go into a climate action plan, to involve the public in helping to come up with those strategies, get their input and their feedback, especially those hard to reach populations that are typically most impacted by the effects of climate change, our vulnerable populations. So that community engagement piece is not something we're able to do. We could do some basic modeling with a small pre-selected group of stakeholders, in the city, just kind of with a committee, I guess you'd say, but we couldn't do a big outreach program to gather public input. And I think that's important. So one way this could play out is you could do the inventory with us just to get it going. We're not going to charge you anything for that. And then if you want to move forward, you could budget for a consultant. And, depending on exactly what terms you want to do with that project, I mean, that has cost $70,000 to $100,000, somewhere in there, for a consultant to do the public engagement and strategy development and drafting a plan and all the presentations and all that work. So just to get, that kind of gives you an idea of how it could play out.
Thank you.
Yep.
I was personally involved in the Des Moines effort, and the one thing that made that happen was Merritt County being 100% behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And so before we would commit to gathering a bunch of data, I think in Johnston at least, we need to find out if there's support at the city to do it, if they think this is a good thing to do. Mm-hmm. Our council people and others, because having been in facility management my entire career, without upper level support, you can put together the best plan ever and it's not going to go anywhere. So we want to make sure that we have that support going forward before we put a lot of work or money and time into this.
I agree. It's important. It's not always easy to secure, but it's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
Are you looking?
Oh, go ahead.
Are you looking more at like ordinance changes, or would the next step after the inventory be more things that advocating for businesses and individuals to change?
It could be any of those things, actually, and it depends on the conditions in the community. So that's why the inventory is so important. You first develop your baseline, and then you look at it and you say, okay, most of our emissions are in transportation, so, or whatever it is, commercial building, energy, but the inventory helps you home in on which sectors you really need to focus on with the strategies that you develop. So if it's transportation, you want to look at different transportation related strategies. and there's an array of kind of common strategies that cities typically use in all of these sectors. One of the things I had a student do, it's been a couple of years ago now, when we just first started doing this, I had him kind of scour the internet and review a lot of different climate action plans that cities have developed, and make a list of common reduction strategies that those plans that make up those plans, and kind of it's broken out into the different sectors. So I have that I'm happy to share. That's just a couple pages of common reduction strategies found in different climate action plans. And I didn't share it beforehand, but the list of data that we need to collect, I also obviously have that. That I'm willing, happy to share whenever you're ready for that. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it really is community specific as to what strategies you need to pursue.
You did. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Eric, can you go ahead and send those 2 sheets of paper in regards to ideas that cities have done for climate action plans, as well as the list of data? Can you send it to Carrie?
Yep.
And she can work with us to decipher it and talk about it.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, the other thing I can share with you is the report, the greenhouse gas emissions inventory that they did for the city of Des Moines as well, if people just want to see what one looks like once it's completed.
Eric, I had about 3 questions
Sure.
that I wrote down while you were speaking. And Rhonda, as a planner, you may have had some of the same questions, and this may be getting the cart before the horse a little bit, but some things to think about are, is Camp Dodge in or out? I mean, that's the elephant in the field for Johnston. Do we consider Camp Dodge part of Johnston or not? Second is, in the time we are in now, what would you consider an inventory baseline date? Because do we consider the inventory before the COVID thing hit? Do we do it now? Do we put it off until we figure out what normal is again? Because they're talking, there are a number of different things they're talking about happening after, this sort of all shakes out. But right now, I would hate to be a real estate developer. I would hate to own a lot of commercial real estate, because I think you're going to have huge vacancies after people have figured out that I can actually do a lot of my work from home. I don't need an office. But that would be another one. And then when you do projections, what is business as normal going forward? Because I don't think anybody can answer that right now. We're in a huge state of flux right now. And it's, but this is also, I think, a great time to talk about doing something like this, because while this is all shaking out, we can shake out how much support we have, what's included, what's not included, et cetera, et cetera. But this would be a lot different. Carrie, when we were back talking about this at the environmental lobby day at the Capitol, that was kind of just before the whole COVID thing hit. If we were talking about it back then, it's a completely different subject than it is now, because we have so many more unknowns. Those are just some thoughts I had as you were talking.
Yeah. Up at Iowa State, you're a facility guy. So up at Iowa State, I work with the facilities, and their heads are spinning, because they have rooms that were planned, classroom improvements, and furniture's ordered.
Right.
And offices, the main business office was doing a remodel. And most offices have lately gone away to getting rid of partitions. Partitions have gone away, and they have these desks that you come in, and if you want to sit by the window today, you sit by the window today. And how does that work in the post-COVID? And that's
Yeah,
what I'm saying. There's a whole lot. So I like
there's
your
a
idea.
ton of questions.
Yeah, and
My son-in-law works down for an ag finance company in, I guess technically it's in Urbandale, but he said currently if I sit at my desk, which he hasn't for weeks, but if I would go back and sit at my desk, I think he counted either 10 or 12 people within 6 feet of it, the current density. And so there's just, and all of this is really going to affect carbon emissions too. I mean, LA supposedly has the cleanest air it's had in decades because people aren't driving.
Yeah.
I don't think we know kind of where that's all going to shake out yet, but that should not stop us from doing it. This is something we still really need to do. It's just that we need to understand that the sand's going to be shifting under our feet.
I completely agree. And none of us know the impact that COVID-19 is going to have on just about anything we're doing.
Right.
So your first question was about Camp Dodge. And I would just say that's probably just a local decision you'd have to make, whether it's included in this thing or not. And that'll have to be made clear, this either includes it or doesn't. And I'd say the decision should be based on how much control the city government, because this is a city planning process, how much control the city government has over what happens at Camp Dodge. If it has very little control, then you should probably leave it out, and just say this excludes Camp Dodge. So if that's possible to parse the data that way so that, you don't include their energy use and water use and solid waste generation and all those things. So that's that one. COVID-19, I don't have any idea. One thing to keep in mind with the way this process works, there's a bit of a lag. Like the baseline year, when we've done this before, it's just been typically like whatever the best data of best available data has been, and that's tended to be more recent years, but it can't be the most recent year. Usually you don't have all the data for the most recent year until halfway through the current year. So right now, I mean, we might be able to get all of the data we would need for 2019. Could use 2019 as a baseline, but I mean, I would probably recommend going back at least a few years, and then you're right, emissions are going to be lower this year, 2020, but maybe they're going to bounce back. It's just, that's completely uncertain right now what impact COVID-19 is going to have on all of this. But I agree with you, that shouldn't stop us from doing the work.
Right, and I don't want to drag this out this meeting out any further, but I think we need to understand that we could be in the middle of a huge paradigm shift here.
Mm-hmm.
And so basing our baseline inventory, and this is from my experience in doing facilities, strategic plans, and things like that. You need to figure out what your baseline needs to be and make sure that you're not comparing apples and oranges. Because if, for example, my former employer, I retired, they didn't fire me, but now known as Corteva, I worked for Pioneer Hybrid for 40 years in their facilities department. If they're going to have half as many people, for example, working on campus, that's going to hugely affect the carbon emissions for the city of Johnston.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's oranges rather than apples. So evaluating the data is going to be very difficult. And we just need to think about that the way Des Moines did it probably isn't the way Johnston and Urbandale and whomever is going to do it because of the timing.
Right.
What's going on in the environment right now, which hopefully, I'm very hopeful that we won't go back to the old ways.
Yeah. That said, I agree with all of that. That said, we do know, IPCC has said we've got to get down 45% below 2010 level by 2030, and then we got to get to net zero by 2050. Those things aren't going to change. I mean, we're hopefully already headed down this year, but that could be temporary. We don't know, but we still do know we got to get below that 2010 level, 45% below it by the year 2030, and we got to get down to nothing by 2050. We could still work off of that and, develop policies that are going to help us get there. So
I think this is not going to be easy, but once again, I say, I think it's something that's critical that we do. We've got to do something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Other questions for Eric?
I'll shut up now.
Oh, no, you're fine, Rod. Just wanted to see if anybody else had anything else. All right. Well, I really appreciate everybody joining us.
Yeah.
And hopefully, we've had at least 4 members of various city councils on here tonight. So I think the next steps is to follow up with each of the communities and folks to, talk amongst themselves about how they want to proceed and see, and then we can get back with you, Eric. But I think there's at least residents and some council members from each of the communities that are interested in moving forward with this. So we really, truly appreciate you taking the time to.
I appreciate all of you and your interest in doing this. I mean, like we keep saying over and over, this is super important work, and it takes dedicated folks who are ready to do the work. So thank you for that. And I'll send those 2 documents to Carrie to distribute to everybody else. And feel free to reach out to me directly, any of you, at any time. If you have follow-up questions or want to discuss anything, I'm happy to do that. This is the work that I'm most passionate about doing now, and so I love talking about it. So anytime.
All right, great. And so then just, I don't know if Linda, if you have anything you want to add for Urbandale folks, or Scott and Julie and Ginger, anything for Johnston folks before we sign off?
No, we will have to get together and decide next steps for Urbandale. I wonder if Mary Ann or Betty have anything to say from Urbandale.
Nope.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Carrie. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Pat, you're on. Did you have anything to say?
No, just thank you. It was a very good program. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Eric. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Stay safe.
Right.
Everybody stay safe.